what is in terms of procurement, the corruption in procurement is very large. Even in the industrialized world, it constitutes 1 to 4% of GDP. In developing countries, the figures are even larger. There are examples where roads are built, and later on, 1 year later, a journalist finds that there is no road. And the explanation that was given by the government was that a flood came and wiped out the entire road. So there are many ways there are 160 ways, by which you can fool the system in the developing world. No matter what processes you adopt in terms of e-procurement or the transparency and so on and so forth, these kind of tools help a lot, but one has to really go further than these tools require in terms of the changing the incentives and structure for the civil service and the behaviors. And in that, in designing systems, dealing with the procurement and so on, one needs to ask fairly simple questions first. One, is the culture of the organization and environment conducive to corruption? And secondly, what is the probability that applicable laws, rules, regulations, procedures, instructions, and practices could be misused or bypassed with corrupt intentions? And finally, are there controls in place that would forestall a corrupt person from indulging in corruption by abuse of authority or misuse or discretion or misinterpretation of rules? So my time is up, so let me end then to say that the question is, how does one ensure the integrity of public procurement? Well, I quote here from President Obama. He says, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Yes, we can and we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw. So our next speaker is Dr. Patricio Valdivieso. He is at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile.
Thank you so much. Let me express my grateful to be with you, the organizers of the conference, with you to be here. I agree with the statement that good governance depends on transparency, equity, accountability and effectiveness in ways that are responsible to the needs of people, as Mr. Shah. Besides, it is composed of the mechanisms, process and institutions through which citizens and groups can articulate their interests, exercise their legal rights, meet their obligations and mediate their differences. With regard to the question about the function of public procurement for governance for the discussions in the panel, I present a perspective about central elements for governance for the discussion in the 5 minutes. This short and summary presentation introduces this synthesized vision of the international, regional and domestic elements to identify important focal points to discuss after. I agree, by the way, with the definition of Mr. Peer. He offered a definition at the start, for instance, with the definition of the Commission of Global Governance about governance. And the international dimension is really important. Governance has none of the domestic and international issues can be managed by sovereign states acting alone or require cooperation among governments and non-state actors. And that, of course, presents many possibilities, but many dangerous possibilities to make mistakes too. I identified some problems in one international perspective, and maybe that is a good point to discuss about this topic in relation with the public procurement as a way to improve the global governance. There are many limitations for governance, for purposes of global governance. One major limitation of, for example, international law or the action of international organizations is that it applies only to states. Multilateral agreements cannot be used directly to bind individuals, multinational corporations, non-governmental organizations, etc. But we talk here about the relation between private sectors and public goods. And this question is very important. One related problem is the absence of international enforcement mechanisms or incentives to accept treaties and other forms of international rules or agreements and international standards to follow up the progress in this issue. We could discuss how to improve through this way the global governance and domestic regional governance and the public procurement. Our two last questions are related to with the consequences of more governance. There are the perception that there are winner and loser in the world, and that we have to find the ways to improve these effects of the global governance, to improve the perceptions, because global governance needs consensus in the world. And the last, accountability and transparency. It is not enough if we try to achieve technical tools to improve governance, with more knowledge, of course. It is necessary accountability and transparency, but in the praxis. Let me express in the last 2 minutes the example in the case of many countries in Latin America. In the last 2 decades, there were many progresses in the area of electronic government to make many things, sell things, public goods, opportunities, etc. But the really important question is how it is in the praxis. If the citizens, civil organizations, everybody have access to the information and to the opportunities. And that is a very important issue related with follow-up, monitoring, standards. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Valdivieso. He is currently the Director of Office of Small Business Programs at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Ms. Brown.
Good morning. Good morning. My time is already up. I want to take a look at this, or at least speak briefly about this from a different perspective. And what I do at the EPA, as the Director of the Office of Small Business Programs, in the federal process here, they have really made it clear and so that small businesses in particular, we work with colleges and universities, we also work with nonprofit organizations. They have an advocate within the federal government who champions for them. And it's one of me in every agency, and that's our job. And part of what we do is to help level that playing field. I think, and I agree with the definitions on what good governance is, but I think it's very important when people come in that you already know what the rules are, you understand those, so that you can play the game. And if you don't, I think that is one of the areas where, and I don't know how other countries are situated, but if you have mechanisms such as what we have here in the States, at least that's the first entrance into a lot of times into the agencies, so that we can work with people who may not be familiar with the process. A lot of people talk procurement, but they really don't understand it. They really don't understand it. And so you really do have to make sure that there are people there within the organization understanding really what the process is, how it works, and then we have to communicate that with folks, so that when they do come in and they do begin to participate in the process, they really understand it. And so that's our role here as the OSDBU, the Office of Small Business Programs, in the federal government. I see later on in the program, Denise, it's good to see you in your new life. She is the former, and that's Denise Rodriguez-Lopez, who is the former director of Department of Transportation Obstacle, and she is now in civilian life. So it's good to see that you are still around, and I say hello. But again, I think it's important that you know who we are, that you recognize what it is that we bring to the table for you. We are advocates, and we talk and meet with the companies to go over the forecast of procurement opportunities. I think with the advent of the electronic distribution of information, that's wonderful. But then once you see it, you read it, what